Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Krashy, and today we're going to do a fun video. It's another tier list, and this one is incredibly inspired, completely inspired by Super Teeds. So she put out a video saying Pokemon Unite will be down for 10 hours, and then she did a balanced tier list and more. And I liked it. I thought that idea was fun. I haven't done a tier list where I talk about like buffs and nerfs on a tier list. So it's not really like a tier list to rank things, but just to like give your thoughts in like a concise way. I really like that. You should definitely be watching Teeds if you're not already. She's an amazing creator, really cool, and does a lot of stuff that like I don't want to do. She does a lot of testing, so go check out Teeds. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we have our items. You can see my little clump of items. This also has held items. So you can see my clump of characters, my clump of Pokemon, and we're going to talk about whether they should be buffed, if they're balanced, or if they should be nerfed. So we'll do it one at a time. So let's go ahead and go in with items. So X speed, I think that X speed needs a buff. I'm gonna be honest. I think that maybe it could get an even lower cooldown. Maybe it could be faster, last longer. I don't know what it needs, but I really just don't feel like it's great. And even though it's not terrible, I think that it's like, I don't know, it's just incredibly niche, which means that it could see a buff, and it may even be balanced. I don't know, but it's the same thing with X attack. I think that most of the battle items are probably going to feel this way to me. There's just never like a, oh yeah, you clearly take this item on this person type of deal, which I think would kind of be balanced, and a lot of the time it doesn't even feel like it's in the conversation for, you know, stuff like that. So full heal, really strong, but not OP in my opinion. I think it's great. I think it honestly operates amazingly. Fluffy tail. Well, now that we know that this is a single use, you know, just for the user, I guess it's balanced. I would prefer it was just different. I like what Fluffy Tail's going for, being the jungle item. I just wish it worked differently, but it's balanced. I feel like it feels good. Eject button. You know, I don't want to see a nerf to eject button, so I'm not going to put it in the nerf category. I want everything else to catch up to eject button. So I'd say eject button feels pretty balanced. Goal boost. I'm going to be honest. I think this thing is balanced. I just think it's really weird. Like, it's just a weird item because MOBAs don't have scoring except for this one, so it's balanced. It's just really niche. I don't know if I really like it, but yeah. Potion, not the greatest thing in the world. You know, it is what it is. And then we have Smokescreen, or slowing smoke. I don't even really know what this thing's called. It's no crazy item, so that's kind of like this is like about what you would expect from these items right here. I think that they could see some buffs. Also, I have these items really big, so I'm gonna go ahead and like X them off the screen because they're really big and they're gonna take up a lot of space. So that's kind of my thoughts on the battle items. So let's go in with Rocky Helm. Rocky Helm needs to be buffed. This thing's just not very great. I don't even know. It's like the stats on it are good, but the effect needs to see some love, and I don't really have an idea for it. But yeah, the effect could definitely see some love. Buff the float stone. Any out of combat text items definitely need to see buffs to the out of combat text, but also, and I've talked about this before, I would love to see a scaling stat line on these items. So like, I think it's like, I forget, let's just throw out a number. Let's say it's 20 attack flat on it. Well, you could keep like a flat attack on it, and then you could put a scaling per level stat line on it. So like blah 0.5% per level, or 0.1% additional attack per level. So actually, you know, like make this item have some increased value for just wearing it throughout the course of the game. I think that could be really cool. Wise glasses might be crazy to you, but I actually think that SP items in this game are incredibly weak. Wise glasses is good. It's not a useless item. It's definitely an item you should be using, but I think that the 7% scaling is like not good enough. So what they should do is they either need to increase the scaling of abilities on certain Pokemon, or they should just increase Wise Glasses scaling. I think that increasing Wise Glasses scaling, they might need to do both, to be honest, whenever it comes to SP attackers, to make them actual SP attackers and not just people that default to Muscle Band. But I think that Wise Glasses could see a nice little buff, up to 10%, maybe up to 15%, double the effective use of it. Could be really interesting. SP attack specs. I'm probably going to end up putting all of the stacking items in buff, because while I think that they're good, they're good items. The problem is you have to score 6 times. And in high level play, you're not scoring 6 times really. Like, it's incredibly hard to score 6 times. So I don't know what they could do with them. Maybe just increase how much you get per stack, per goal, and make it only 4 goals, so that way it's like actually more tangible, because that's what it needs to be. It needs to be more tangible. 6 goals, that's a lot, so not a huge fan of that personally, but yeah, it is what it is. All right, let's see, where are we at? Shell Bell. Shell Bell definitely needs a buff. Same thing. I think that the problem with Shell Bell is that, like, yeah, it's a cooldown reduction item, but the cooldown reduction on it is incredibly low. So they should probably focus on making this a cooldown reduction item. Increase the cooldown reduction on this. Maybe lower the cooldown of the actual healing on it, and or just add a scaling stat line to it. So add a scaling stat line for the cooldown or the SP attack that it gives. I don't know. Just do something to buff the actual use of this item. Score Shield needs to get nerfed in some way. I've talked about Score Shield. They could either nerf the way that scoring works by lowering the value that you get, or making the value that you get in terms of healing, ult charge percentage, experience. They could nerf that down to be relative to how much you're scoring, or they could just actually nerf the Score Shield or rework it in some way. I feel like this item is like anti-defense, and it's like it's incredibly difficult to deal with, if not impossible a lot of the time, and I'm not a huge fan of it. Scope Lens. I feel like Scope Lens is pretty balanced. It's niche, it's strong, it's really strong, but you don't put it on everybody. It's not some crazy broken item, and I think that it's pretty good. Muscle Band, ironic enough, is one of the best items in the game, but it honestly is, Muscle Band should be like what every other item aspires to be. Has, you know, good stats on it, sure, whatever, the stats almost never matter. Good stats on it, but has a really strong item effect, something that, like, yes, we want that, right? Like a really good item effect. Awesome. Leftovers. This thing needs a buff. It's an out of combat, 8 seconds, just needs to get reduced. Honestly, I think that Leftovers is pretty decent. It just has too long of a timer on it. Focus Band, same deal. I think that Focus Band is actually pretty balanced. I know that it tends to be one of the big 3, right? But I don't think that it's actually super OP. I just think that it's actually one of the few items in the game that's incredibly reliable. So we need more of these items to be more reliable. EXP share, you know, while it's very niche, I find it to be rather balanced. It gives good benefit to the game. You're not going to run this on every character, obviously. In fact, you're only going to run it on like a few. But it's niche, it works, it's good, and it's exactly like Energy Amplifier. I don't really have any issues with this item. I think it's niche, I think it works, I think it's good, I think it's balanced. Buddy Barrier needs to be nerfed. I think the perfect nerf for Buddy Barrier is to make it a non-self shield. The reason so many people take this item is because it's your get out of jail free card button. When you're low, you can use it for yourself, and then it just so happens that if somebody else is around, you give them a shield. That's why everybody uses it. If you made this an ally shield only, well, not everybody's going to run it anymore. It's as simple as that. Let's talk about Greninja, for example. I run this item because when I ult, sometimes it saves my life. But if it didn't have the option to do that, I'm probably not going to run this item anymore. So I think that's a pretty great way to nerf it down. And then attack weight, same deal. Out of combat's too long. The attack weight's actually, or the attack vest, sorry, is actually pretty good, but it's just too long. So those are our items. Take a little glimpse at it. That's what I'm thinking. I really do think that only these ones are the ones that feel like a huge issue. Again, I know Focus Band could probably be in that conversation, but it's just a really solid early game item. And when you drop Focus Band, you know that you don't have it early game. You have to think about that. But toward the mid and late game, Focus Band, it matters, but it doesn't matter nearly as much. And that's where I tend to swap in like Scope Lens and things. These items right here, just really, really solid items. Everything else, they just need some love to catch up a little bit. And honestly, some of them need baby changes. I'd say the worst items in the game truly are like Shell Bell, Floatstone, and like Rocky Helm. Like those need some pretty considerable love. Everything else is pretty damn good, and just needs a little bit of changes. All right, so let's go ahead and X out my items, and let's talk about our Pokemon. All right. So I don't have this in any crazy order. Don't know. Balanced, Ninetales. I feel like she is one of the attackers that is... It feels perfect. It feels like Ninetales is strong, very good early game, consistently does well in the mid game, and then late game is great. It has a solid ultimate, perfect. Again, the pinnacle of how things should be. So Talonflame, not good. Falls behind, can't scale well, is squishy, doesn't have the survivability or the damage that makes sense to pick over other types of characters. And you're going to see a pretty consistent theme there. Slowbro. They nerfed Slowbro, and I don't really get it. Like, Slowbro's still pretty reliable, but Slowbro could use a little bit of love, right? Like, a little bit, like maybe undo the surf nerf, or give him a little bit more defense, or I don't know what it is, because he very much so is the stand and deliver type of tank. Like, he's just there, he's annoying, he's in your face, he's got all this kind of CC, but just doesn't feel great. Mr. Mime, I think Mr. Mime's greatly balanced. I think this character is incredibly strong, but also very niche. I really like the way the character plays and feels really, really good to me. Does solid damage. Does solid supporting. Lucario, this character's ridiculous. Scaling passive shield with attack, an ultimate that makes him, it's like the ultimate's not broken, but it's like still just really reliable, does crazy damage at close range, gives him the unstoppable, and makes him run super fast. He's got crazy mobility, crazy burst, whether that's extreme speed or power to punch. His attack scaling is like some of the highest in the game, if not the highest. Gets away with way too much. Like, this character is silly broken. Silly broken. Lucario, or not Lucario, Greninja, same thing. Greninja is kind of silly. I don't think that Greninja needs a crazy big nerf, though. I think that there's a couple of ways you could approach a Greninja nerf. I think that Greninja needs to do either less attack, like just in general, like just cut down his damage so he has to do more of it to get that kind of value, or you like maybe lower some of the scaling on his abilities. It really feels like Surf is probably overperforming a little bit. I think Water Shuriken's fine. I'm not worried about that. But my opinion of like the auto attack attackers is like maybe their range is like a little too far too. Like, so there's a couple ways you could do it. I think you could either like lower his attack, maybe lower the scaling on Surf a little bit, make it do a little bit less damage, or you could like pull in his range a little bit. But my point being, like, the sentiment is like the tiniest of nerfs. The tiniest of nerfs. I don't want him to be useless. You know, because CC mages and like the CC attacker Pokemon are really strong. Don't want him to be useless, but he's overperforming a little bit. Gengar needs to see some love. This character is, you know, he's a speedster. Like, the speedsters just struggle right now. They struggle to scale. It's really what it is. They do great damage, but they can't stay alive to do the damage, and they can't, they just don't feel like they have a place, especially with someone like Greninja in the game, who just steals their jungle and is infinitely better than them and scales great and does crazy damage and is safe, and yeah, it has crazy bursts. Like, the speedsters just need that love. Gardevoir's honestly great, but her early game makes her insufferable, and I don't think that this game, like, that's the problem with this game. They have like these early game characters and these late game characters, and some of the early game characters fall off and some of the late game characters take forever to get there, and I honestly don't think that works. I think the only thing that works are balanced characters across the board. So let's buff the late game of speedsters, and let's buff the early game of some of the attackers, right? Like, and Greninja, like, let's give him some love in the early game for laning, but that's a completely different discussion about whether or not he should be able to be in the jungle. But that's a different discussion for another time, and or a discussion we've already had. I think we need the same kind of treatment for all-rounders. Garchomp is great, but he's late game great, and he sucks in the early game, and he can only jungle well, and laning him, it just feels awful. Buff up the early game a little bit, but give it a little bit of love. Keep that consistent scaling throughout to into the end game. It feels really, really good. Eldegoss, I think Eldegoss is beautifully balanced. Feels solid throughout the full course of the game. Feels like you're bringing value no matter what you do. I love it. Crustle is, and listen, Crustal's annoying, and I think that there is some light OP things about Crustle, but I think that that's a score shield problem. I think that that's a shield stacking with score shield problem. Crustle feels really balanced. I think Crustle feels really great. Cramorant feels really, really balanced, incredibly strong, great early game, maybe too strong, but I'm gonna stick on the side of like these early game attackers need to be strong. Like, I like that. I want to see other people hit that level of early game strength. Really, really good scaling. Actually kind of falls off toward the end of the game just because there's so many shields and people are doing kind of crazy stuff and they're group fighting and team fighting really, really well. But honestly, he doesn't really fall off. You get my point. I think Cramorant is solid. Very, very solid. Definitely someone that you can rely on. Cinderace. I think Cinderace feels balanced. I think Cinderace feels like what Greninja should probably feel like, where you're doing that damage consistency, but you're not just rolling everyone, right? If anything, Cinderace might need a tiny buff, if anything. But I think that Cinderace is pretty balanced, mostly. Blastoise, nerf it. Listen, we did some like, we on one of our streams, we took 5 games of Blastoise, and we averaged out his damage, and it was some crazy number. I don't remember what it was. And then we did like a random, like, let's nerf that damage by 40% on an average, and it was still like 50,000 damage. Dude, nerf Blastoise's damage across the board by like 40%. Seriously, give him a massive nerf. I want his rapid spin hydro pump build, or rapid spin water spout build. I want it to be viable damage wise, but it can't be that high, right? Like it needs to maybe cap at like 40-50k, because there are attackers that do 40-50k and they don't have the defense and the mobility and the, you know what I mean? Like, I want his damage build to be viable, but he's a tank. Like we got to pull him in. We got to pull this character in a little bit. Absol, this character, it's the same thing. It's the speedster effect. They don't scale. It's as simple as that. Great in the early game, kind of. I mean, especially Absol in the early game, but he just doesn't scale. The Pokemon doesn't scale. It can't really do anything in team fights. It's just not great. Same thing with Charizard. I mean, it's the all-rounder speedster effect. They're just not. They don't have a place. They don't have anywhere they can go, except for Lucario. They're forced to jungle, it feels like. If you lane them, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Their early game is awful. Buff up these early games right here. Let's do it. Let's see it happen. Pikachu. You know, I think that Pikachu needs a buff, but the craziest thing is that I actually think that Pikachu might be closer to balanced than speedsters and all-rounders lately, which is kind of crazy. But as an attacker, Pikachu really doesn't do the role well. Pikachu, or you know what it is? Pikachu is just really niche. Like, it brings a lot of CC and does some pretty good damage. But that's why I view Pikachu like Mr. Mime. I always talk about this lately. Pikachu is like a support character to me, like Mr. Mime. The same way that Wiggly is like a tank, and the same way that, you know, you know what I mean? Like, you know how there's like this, you know, leaning into other classes. Pikachu feels pretty balanced to me lately, but I think that the character could see a buff. I think most people would probably agree with that as well. Venusaur, really, really balanced. Ever since the buffs to Venusaur, the character feels good. It feels like an option. I like that. I don't feel like Venusaur is just the best of the best, which doesn't mean that the character needs a buff, but Venusaur is a great option, an incredible option. Oh man, look, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to put Zeraora in balanced, and there's a reason why. I think that verbally explaining this is fine. Discharge needs a nerf. It's true. But the thing about Discharge needing a nerf is that it needs the tiniest nerf, because this is the only speedster that can hang. And while that's true of Lucario, Lucario is disturbingly overpowered. Nowhere close to how strong Zeraora is. Like Zeraora can't even hold a flame to Lucario, although Zeraora does crazy damage. But Discharge needs a nerf. I'm thinking 5-10% nerf, something to just not make it feel like you're literally deleting people off the face of the planet. But yeah, a nice little nerf. Wigglytuff is tanky, supporty, does too much damage. It's the same thing, right? Like, the character is just overperforming. I think you either nerf the way that Sing works somehow, make it, I don't know, longer cooldown, just a tiny nerf to pull this character in line, or you nerf the defenses down a little bit, like before, where, you know, Wigglytuff wasn't a tank. But yeah, Snorlax is probably mostly balanced now. I still hate block, and I think that the issue hasn't shined enough. Like, the issue with block hasn't been shining because we have like Wiggly and Blastoise and Lucario, but I still think that block is too powerful. So I'm gonna fit him in the nerf category, which is probably crazy, but I think that block just needs the tiniest nerf. The tiniest nerf. It's the same thing with Zeraora, which honestly, again, Zeraora could be on this list. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like, look, at this point, we'll just change it just to appease the list in terms of consistency. Tiniest discharge nerf, tiniest block nerf, needs some decent nerfs, needs considerable nerfs. Tiny nerf needs considerable nerfs. Machamp, where are you? You are right here. Same deal. Like, you struggle in the early game as a laner. You're honestly great as a jungler, but you're just struggling a little bit. You know, it's tough to be a Machamp player, and to be an all-rounder player if you're not a Lucario. I feel like you have to try to get jungle, or you're gonna have a tough game. And then Blissey feels great. She feels great, just nice and balanced. The support role in general is nice and balanced, it feels like, minus Wigglytuff. So those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. We'll take a look at it really quickly. Got our Pokemon all filled in balance wise, what needs to be nerfed, what needs to be buffed in my opinion. And then we have our items. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Again, shout out to Teeds for doing that kind of video herself, because it really inspired me. I thought that this was a lot of fun, and I wanted to try my hand at it. So thank you so much, friends. As always, be sure to be kind to one another. Tell someone that you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.